Hello. Good morning, everyone. So the connection to Shavuos, there is Kilib Bnei Yisrael Avadim, but there's also Inlech Ben Charen El Mishes Batera. So there's multiple connection to Avadim and slavery to Shavuos. And so sort of the structure, what I want to do is I want to briefly go through what is the, when we talk about slavery in the modern day, what are the modern definitions of slavery? Are they useful for our conversation? I want to go through different types of avdos, different types of slavery that exist in Torah, and then discuss briefly what the how Torah, the difference in the way Torah looks at it and the way that we in the modern day kind of look at it, and what are the underlying premises and what are the underlying differences between the Abishur's look on this and the way the modern day we sort of look at it, and why these end up with our differences. Before we start, it's worth noting, and we talk about the abuse of different people in our lives, Rav and Abai have a machlekes about when we're talking about people being in what's an unhappy marriage. Like, what does it mean when someone's in an unhappy marriage? Rav and Abai have an argument. It says, when you sit down for a meal, does your wife prepare the meal for you and then verbally abuse you as you eat? Or does she prepare the meal and then turn away and let you sit by yourself? And so everyone has a different version of what it means to be mistreated, right? Rav and Abai, each one had their thing that they severely disliked. For our conversation, so when we talk about what is modern day definition of slavery, so if you look at, they have international organizations that try to prevent modern day slavery, and their definition is quite broad. The modern day version, if you go on Anti-Slavery International, which is one of these big organizations that try to stop human trafficking, their definition is modern slavery is when an individual is exploited by others for personal commercial gain. Whether tricked, coerced, or forced, they lose their freedom, and this includes obviously a very wide range of things, right? Many people are exploited, many people are tricked or coerced for... Yes. We've full 15 minutes, so yeah. There are many different ways, obviously, of exploiting other people for personal gain. The definition, the reason why we in the modern day find slavery abhorrent is not because people are being exploited. Every employee to some degree can be exploited. The specific thing that really, I think, bothers us on a human level about slavery is in the modern day, we find it very abhorrent, this concept that one person should own another. The idea that a person can be an asset and that person can be passed down in Yerusha, that particularly is, in my opinion, the thing, the key sticking point of what makes this type of exploitation more bothersome and more of a problem than any others. And when it comes to this type of thing, so it's useful to talk about what are the different types of slavery that exist in Torah. And so briefly, there are 4 essential types of slavery in Torah. There is and we're going to touch on the relevant points of each one that are relevant for our discussion, which is, the first one is Amma Ivriya. Amma Ivriya is a very brief sort of thing. It only lasts from when a girl is, for a young girl, she leaves this stage of being Amma Ivriya. As soon as she reaches puberty, she's supposed to, there's a mitzvah on behalf of the owner to marry her into our household. You're really not allowed to work. You're not allowed to put her to work in any difficult task. She's really supposed to become part of your family. And so, it doesn't really have any of the hallmarks of modern slavery. And so, for our conversation, it's almost entirely useless. If we're looking for what does slavery talk about slavery, and Amar Ivriya has zero bearing on the conversation. It's kind of a social program that if the father can't support his daughter, we say you can have another family adopt her and eventually take her as a daughter-in-law. Not at all useful for our conversation. The next step is an Eved Ivri, and Eved Ivri also not entirely useful for our conversation. There's many different types of work you're not allowed to do with him. You're not allowed to give him useless, meaningless tasks. There are many jobs where you can give people meaningless tasks just to fill their time. They can go free in many ways. You have to feed their family. You have to support the person's family while you're keeping them. He's not allowed to have a lower standard of living than you. The employee benefits are, again, a lot higher than most mandated jobs like in the United States of America. Again, really not useful. Bless you. Sure.
I mean, recently there was a whole big article in the BBC about how, in Afghanistan people are selling their daughters for, they're selling their daughters to older people, and it's considered very much strongly a form of slavery.
No, so 100%. That sort of thing is. With an Amma Ivriya, the way that we prevent it from being sort of exploitative is, first of all, we only allow it in that really extreme dire circumstances where the father literally cannot provide food. And so we're left with the choice of, should this girl lay at home and starve to death, or should be accepted into a family who will try to marry her off to a son-in-law or whatever it is. And in fact, even within that, there's limits. We say that he's allowed to marry off to his son, but not to his grandson. There's a very sort of defined limit, and obviously every system is liable for exploitation, especially with this sort of thing. But broadly, it doesn't fit the definition of the asset thing, because also the time limitation is really the key thing. If you own a person and you can't inherit them down to your children, functionally, you don't really own them. And so that, for me, I think is really the key thing. And with an Eved Ivri, you also find that thing. An Eved Ivri is you can the laws of Yerusha do apply. You can't pass them down to your descendants. Only male children. Only to a Ben you can. They're not. Let's say you don't have any children, and they don't become part of the estate that gets passed on to parents or your extended family, like every other Yerusha is, only to male sons. Now, the third and fourth type are both types of Eved K'nanim. And so an Eved K'nani does now finally have the hallmarks of modern day slavery. You're allowed to give them meaningless work. You're allowed to. You're not allowed to. If you kill them, actually, you're liable for the death penalty, just like killing any other person. So there are some protections. You don't fully own the rights to their life. You're not supposed to mistreat them if you cut off if the Yetzi Bar Shevarim. But broadly, they are Yerusha. There's a mitzvah. You're actually not allowed to send them free, which we'll discuss in a minute. But broadly, this finally reaches the hallmarks of modern day slavery. And so we find for the first time in Torah that this idea that one person cannot own another, we find in Torah that Torah doesn't seem to have an issue with this. For an Eved K'nani, in fact, in Torah says, there's a mitzvah to keep these people forever. Now, just broadly, all the sources for this are taken from there's Parshas Vayikra has some occurs for this. Rambam Hilchos Avadim, Rambam Hilchos Sarabia, and Perkid Gimel Yadalad over there discusses Eved K'nani, and then Torah and Shulchan Aruch both have in Yeridea and Reish Samach Zayin. So that sources for all this stuff. Now there is a second type of. Now the thing about Eved K'nani, what would make us look at this and say, well, is this really slavery? Is that an Eved K'nani really is a sort of half Jewish person. When in fact the Rambam discusses Eved K'nani in the context of Gerus, right? The Rambam talks about what happens to a Ger. A Ger comes and you ask him, what did you see in the Jewish people that made you want to come? And so the Rambam talks about how when you buy an Eved from the marketplace, you buy an Eved from a non-Jew, you come to me and say, you don't say, why did you choose to convert? You say, do you want to enter the category of Avdi Yisrael, of Jewish servants, and become one of the observant of them? If he agrees, we tell him Ikari Adas, we tell him some of the fundamentals of Yiddishkeit, and what are the Schar B'Einish. We give him the basics of Yiddishkeit, and then we put him in a mikvah. We basically give him tefillah. You have to put him in a mikvah. You have to have bris milah, and there's all these things. And so he's already a quasi-Jew, and in fact, the way he leaves his status of an Eved, he becomes a full-fledged Yid. That beginning of Gerus gets completed later. And so already the fact that we look at Avdus as a halfway step to being a full-fledged Jew already means that it's not fully just an Eved relationship. Now there is a fourth type of Eved also, which is worth noting. It's very briefly mentioned in Rambam, but and Dharma sort of disagrees with it. But we have. The way that the Rambam talks about it is that there is an Eved Ger Teshuv, which is that if when you first buy this Eved, you make a T'nai L'chatchila and you accept him, I'll find that he stays a sort of Ger Teshuv, which is that he doesn't actually accept any of the mitzvahs, and he doesn't, he's just the Shem Mitzvah Nenech, and in that case, you're able to keep him as a Ger Teshuv. He doesn't ever reach this half Jewish stage. The reason why this isn't Noeg at all today is because this Ger Teshuv Eved is pegged to the standard Ger Teshuv standard, which is standard Ger Teshuv standard. It only exists when Yevel's Noeg, which the Ger Teshuv, there's a standard of a Ger Teshuv. The standard of a Ger Teshuv does not exist outside of Yevel, and so because Yevel hasn't existed ever, exactly, so Yevel hasn't existed for thousands of years, exactly. Therefore, this doesn't apply today. So broadly, these are all different types. Now, it's just worth mentioning about this, there is a mitzvah that say that you're not allowed to send an Eved free, which, again, when we talk about owning another person and how we like sending them free, you're going to run into this problem. There is a mitzvah saying you're not allowed to send them free. It's a mitzvah say, Le'ilm Ta'avaydu. There are exceptions for Dvar mitzvah. So, for example, what? So, in Mitzrayim later, but at the end of the day, when we're talking about what the ethical and moral rights and wrongs of Torah, you can't on the one hand say that well, we believe in setting them free, and there's a famous thing about the Romans who didn't know if you freed a slave, it was considered a Jewish thing. You can say that, but on the other hand, Nebishir says in Torah, it's kind of a problem on an ethical level. If we look at it as being a wrong thing, famous stories are that Rabbi Eliezer came into a minyan, Eliezer needed a minyan, so he freed his Eved. And so we know that you're able to, and there's stories of there's a shifcha that people were treating indecently, and so you free them also to prevent this michshel to the rabbim. But broadly, the takeaways from this, if we go through different types of avadim, we can see that although many of them are sort of decent employee-employee relationships, there are elements of avadim, which transgress this klal of people owning other people, and that we would have an issue with. Now, there is another sort of svara people say which is that Torah speaks to the sort of our lesser angels, right? Torah speaks to the circumstance and civilization you find yourself in, and in a system which accepts slavery, this is the best option. And the issue with that is that we have two other places in Torah where we have opposites. We have one case in Torah where there is sort of an unreasonable moral standard that people find themselves in, and therefore Torah says, you know what, this is unreasonable, I can't expect you to keep to it, therefore it's fine, it's mutter. We have another standard, another area where there's an unreasonable moral standard that Torah holds us to, and it still says, you know what, I care about this one enough that you're going to have to keep it. And those two things are Eishes Fastayr and Ribbis, right? So an Eishes Fastayr is this case where the Gemara says, that people in war, Torah does not expect people to be, soldiers in war to be able to actually restrain their impulses, and so what it does is it creates a framework saying, here is the right way to do the wrong thing. We don't find this by slavery. We don't find this lashon in Shas of lo dibter el keneged zahar, that really you're not supposed to have avadim, and here's the way to do it right. And so the fact that Torah knows when to say lo dibter el keneged zahar, and by avadim it doesn't say it, kind of tells us that Torah doesn't see this as a best way to deal with an imperfect system. Torah doesn't actually have an issue with it. And the other version of this is Ribbis, which is that we see that Torah, when it cares, when the Eibusher cares, the Eibusher puts its foot down, right? When it comes to Ribbis, it's extremely difficult to do your standard economic activity, buying, lending, selling, etc., without some form of Ribbis to free up capital. And Torah, nevertheless, Eibusher puts his foot down and says, you're not allowed to lend with Ribbis. And this was so unreasonable to the extent that Hillel and Hillel didn't have to walk it back, introducing, we have Hatter Iskas, and we have principles, we have all sorts of ways to get around the Ribbis and Shemitah and Yevel and all these things, because it was such an unreasonable standard that we couldn't actually keep to it. And it doesn't make sense economically. And so what we see from these two cases, from the Eishes Fastayr, and we see from Ribbis, is that when Torah actually thinks that something is wrong, either it will say, you know what, either it'll say this is an unreasonable standard, you can't be expected to keep to it, therefore we'll find a framework to make it allowable, or on the other hand, it'll say, you know what, this is so important that I care enough, I'm going to put my foot down. So those two areas kind of tell us that that we can't easily get out of this by saying that Torah doesn't have an issue with it. And so until now, sources here on Bright Stars. So the svara that I would have to basically say what the difference in Torah, the way Torah sees the way that we in the modern day see it is that there are two differences. There's two things different the way Torah sees things and the way we see things. The first is that from the Eibusher's perspective, and the Eibusher really doesn't seem bothered by the different by what we own and how we deal with each other. From the Eibusher's perspective, I am all the way on top. You are all some degrees of below me. The fact that you have hierarchies within this level below, the Eibusher never seems super concerned with. And in fact, we see the Eibusher on the other hand respects hierarchies immensely, even when they're oppressive. A key example of this, every child knows in Chumash that whenever Moshe went to Parai, Moshe was always respectful, and Hashem wanted him to be respectful. And when Moshe tells Parai that you're going to come to me, Moshe phrases it in very respectful ways, because at the end of the day, Hashem respects hierarchies. And part of this is because at the end of the Yiddishkeit is a hierarchy. The Eibusher is always at the top, and like the Rambam says that the Melech is below him and the people are below him. Torah has certain respect for hierarchy. And so from the Eibusher's perspective, as long as people are being decent and nice and kind to each other, have whatever hierarchies you want. I don't care how you organize yourselves, because at the end you all serve me. And the Eibusher says explicitly, it says, Kili kol aretz, it's interesting to note, by the way, that this phrase "ki that something belongs to me, you find it throughout Tanakh. You only really find it 5 times. Ki li. You find it 4 times. Eibusher says it. Ki li haaretz, ki li kol aretz, ki li b'nei Yisrael. The only time then Tanakh that this ki li phrase, because this thing really belongs to me, is after Shlomo Melech becomes king. Adonio, his brother who tried to stage a rebellion, comes to Bathsheba and he says that really Avishai kosher namis the Melucha belongs to me, so at least give me a consolation prize, let me take Avishag, and then Shlomo gets really upset and kills him and kills Avyasar HaKain or whatever. But it's just in this phrase that Eibusher gets used one other time in Tanakh.
In the sense of ownership.
Yeah. So we see that this is one of the answers. Basically, I think one of the stars here, but we would say is that the reason why the Eibusher is not bothered by this idea of slavery, because if the essential evil that we find in slavery is people owning each other, from the Eibusher's perspective, the different hierarchies that we instill within our societies don't really bother him so much as everyone's treating each other decently. And on the note of treating each other decently, it's very important to note that at the end of Ram Hechzavadim, the Rambam says that although mutar lavai be'eved kanim b'farach, you're able to treat them, you're able to work very hard with them. You should be nice to them, don't be too difficult. And how this is midah of Zari shel Avram, and we're not cruel people, we're nice and kind, etc., etc. And they're supposed to work for you. You don't have to embarrass them. You don't have to treat them difficultly. You don't hurt them, and all these things. Now, the other key detail I would say is that one of the other things that bothers us so much about this idea of avdus, slavery, is that we are raised from very young with the mindset that we all have a personal mission we have to fulfill in this world, right? That we all have individual tasks. You have to wake up in the morning, you have to daven, you have to learn. We have individual missions we can do. We're not really raised in the sense of collective ownership, that like Bnei Yisrael have to do things. It's us. I have to wake up in the morning, I have to do all this stuff. And the idea that Yiddishkeit is a personal obligation, and less on the klal, is, one could argue that this is a thing which really gets updated and changes with Ezra, right? Once we have the institution of Shemon Esrei, and then we have standard tefillah, not really Ezra, really later, but the idea is that once we have tefillah makim karbanos tiknu, the key difference between tefillah and karban is that a karban is instituted on the klal, it's instituted on everyone. I give my machzor shekel once a year, and I don't have to worry about it. Again, you have to daven when things happen, but the idea that you have a daily obligation to Hashem, the idea that the Yiddishkeit is a chayv on the gavra, on me individually, and not on the general klal Yisrael. If you look throughout Tanakh, all the problems, all the things we do, we're punished as a klal, we're treated as a klal. You don't find, if you go through Tanakh, you don't find individual people being called to task unless they're important. They're kings, they're kind of gedolim. Eli is castigated for how he treats people. Yerevam, all these people, they're treated for how the klal deals. And one could argue that because over time Yiddishkeit has shifted from being more cloud-based to being more individual-based, this is also an issue we have, which is why Torah broadly does not have as much of an issue with avdus, because on a personal level, in each individual people not being able to fulfill their mission is not as much of an issue. Yes?
That doesn't, fine that Torah only mentions it like with high status people. The fact that Torah is mentioning about high status people is because they were high status people, not because it wasn't held for everybody.
The fact that it's held,
Torah is only talking about high status people.
100%. And yet, the focus throughout most of Tanakh is never on individual people doing right or wrong. Individual people, the way they get punished, the way that things happen to them, are never the focus. We don't find, the Navi doesn't come to individual people in the same way that it comes to address the cities and stuff. You're making valid points, and at the end of the day, I would like to believe that the Eibusher always cared what individual people do, but the focus isn't the same.
Something was also, like, for example, saying, it was also like leadership, but it was not talking about an action, each unique individual.
Sodom is really the perfect opposite example, because Sodom is the key issue that many people say the issue with Sodom is that legally you're able to do so many awful things. That many societies have people which do wrong things. Anyway, the point is, so this is essentially why this is hopefully a scare over what the issues are, and why I think we have a certain dama leheshiv where when we talk about avdus, we try to focus on the Eved Ivri element of it and saying how it's not really slavery, it's not really an issue. Within the Eved Knani, there are also elements that I think in the modern day we would find slightly problematic, and I think this is an attempt to sort of solve that and figure out what is the difference in the way Torah sees and the way we see it. And yeah. Time.